So this is one of my favorite places in the Holy Land. It's the Sea of Galilee. We're here on the southern shore. Looking over my shoulders, you can see the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus had his ministry as a Galilean, and of course Peter and other disciples were fishermen here. And it reminds me of one of my favorite management lessons, and I give credit to my chief of staff when I was in office, Barney Barnes. Our running joke is every sheriff needs a Barney, and I had mine, and that joke never gets old, by the way. But at any rate, he shared this with me. It's something called the Peter Principle. Now, normally when you think about the Peter Principle, at least in the management and leadership literature that's out there, some folks over here get baptized in the Sea of Galilee, which is kind of cool too. But at any rate, the Peter Principle means that someone will get promoted up the chain of command to a certain point where they're now been promoted to a level of incompetency, where they're no longer able to manage or function in that particular position. That's called the Peter Principle, as if to say they've been promoted through competency levels until they sort of petered out, I guess, to speak. But I want to talk about a different Peter Principle, and this one has a biblical perspective, which is only fitting since we're here in a biblical-oriented place. And it goes like this. First, there's three principles of leadership and management. The first is a Jethro principle. Now, Jethro was Moses' father-in-law. And Moses had led the children of Israel out into the promised land, and he was just being overcome with all the disputes that they had and all the problems that he was being called upon to mediate. It was wearing him out. And so his father-in-law, Jethro, says, you can't do all this yourself. First of all, you got to train and teach the people in their proper principles of righteousness and the principles of the law. And then you need to start to delegate. You set up a chain of command. You have leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, which very loosely correlates to our idea of federal, state, local government and the family as a governing unit, loosely. But at any rate, the point is you got to delegate authority. You have to have a chain of command. You have to have some type of hierarchy, some type of a structure. And that really is an important principle. In leading an organization, leading a group of people, you delegate authority down chain of command. So that's the Jethro principle, the first principle of leadership. The second one he called the Solomon principle. Now, Solomon, of course, was the king of Israel, and he built the first temple. And he couldn't do it himself. He had to bring in all the different materials. Number one, he had to get the cedars of Lebanon, and he had to get the stones and from different areas around the countryside there. And he had to bring in the artisans and the masons and the workers and the embroiderers and all the different skilled labor that he needed to bring to the task at hand. And so the second principle of leadership of an organization would be to make sure you have the resources that you need to get the job done in terms of not only your manpower resources, but the other physical resources that are necessary. And then that brings us to the Peter principle. And so Peter, of course, was one of the disciples, and Peter was a fisherman, somewhat hot-headed fisherman. I've heard him compared to a South Carolina redneck. But at any rate, Peter was a fisherman. So once you get your chain of command and your structure in place, and once you identified and mobilized the resources that you need to get the job done, then you can go fishing. This is Sheriff Ray Nash, Police Dynamics Media from the Sea of Galilee in the wonderful land of Israel.